Sasa zamani zile.
For many Kenyans, the name Mwai Kibaki evokes deep reverence for a career civil servant, widely deemed to be one of Kenya's most accomplished economists. Mwai Kibaki has arguably served in most of the notable positions as far as steering Kenya's economic roadmap since independence is concerned, including being the country's parliamentary secretary for the Treasury between 1963 and 1966, serving as the Minister for Commerce and Industry between 1966 and 1969, serving as the Minister of Finance and Planning between 1969 and 1981, and eventually as the President or Chief Executive Officer of the enterprise that is Kenya between 2002 and 2013. Mwai Kibaki's stellar profile as an economist comes as no surprise. He studied economics, history and politics at Makerere University and emerged top of his class with a first-class honours in 1955. He would later pursue a Bachelor of Science in Public Finance and graduate with a distinction from the prestigious London School of Economics, after which he would return to serve as an assistant lecturer at Makerere University's Economics Department between 1958 and 1959. Mwai Kibaki's career in Kenya's public service commenced in 1963 while serving in the capacity of the Parliamentary Secretary for the Treasury. His first business before the floor of the House took place on July 24, 1963, where he tabled the country's development spending estimates and a review of the three-year economic plan covering the period 1960 to 1963. In his submission, Mwai Kibaki laid out the framework for the medium term by saying, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, sir, our intention is to have a 6-year development plan stretching from the financial year 1964-65 to 1969-1970. In planning for that period, we are going to break it up into 2 phases of 3 years each, for it has been found through experience in other countries that shorter development plans are more practical." End of quote. In November 1963, at the height of the debate on the need for a minimum wage policy, Kibaki would take to the floor of the House and make the following submission in defense of the ordinary consumer. Mwai Kibaki said, and I quote, "Even in towns like Nairobi, where a worker has a minimum wage guarantee of 115 shillings, it is not a solution to his troubles. He still has to pay 20 cents to travel from Makadara to work and 30 cents back. This means in a month, he will have spent more than 18 shillings on travel alone. He also quite often has to pay 70 shillings for a place to live." End of quote. In 1966, Mwai Kibaki would be appointed Minister of Commerce and Industry, a position that would elevate his role in shaping Kenya's economic landscape. In this docket, Mwai Kibaki prioritized the improvement of the business environment, especially for small ventures owned by Africans. In one of his submissions before the National Assembly, Mwai Kibaki had this to say, and I quote, "In 1965, Mr. Speaker, 108 or 25% of new companies registered were wholly Africa-owned and 54% of the new businesses registered were African. It is important to note that we are now getting Africans into business. I am also happy to note that the number of companies that went into liquidation were only 7 compared to 28 the year before." End of quote. It was under Mwai Kibaki's watch at the Ministry of Commerce and Industry that industries such as Kisumu Cotton Mills, Kenya Tytex Mills in Thika, Sisal Twine and Rope Factory in Nairobi, and East African Cables were set up. 1969 would mark a transformative year for Mwai Kibaki. Leading any country's national treasury or Ministry of Finance is a coveted position, and in that year, Kibaki would be elevated to serve in this capacity, tabling his maiden budget speech on July 3, 1970. While at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, Mwai Kibaki will be remembered for having steered the economy through considerable headwinds. The global oil crisis of 1973 was the first major litmus test for Kibaki. The October 1973 embargo by OPEC economies sent the price of oil in the global markets through the roof, inflicting adverse effects on oil-importing economies such as Kenya. It is intervention through the Export Act of 1974 that is widely credited as having helped mitigate the spillovers from the oil price shock. Further down the road, the collapse of East African Community in 1977 would present yet another litmus test for Mwai Kibaki, who would be at the steering wheel of the team that led the transition and determination of sharing of assets among East African economies. Upon the death of President Jomo Kenyatta in August 1978 and Moi's subsequent rise to power, Kibaki would double up as Vice President and Minister of Finance. It is a portfolio he would hold until 1983 in the post-1982 abortive coup realignment, when he would be redeployed to Vice President and Minister for Home Affairs, a position he would hold for 5 years until 1988 before being assigned the Ministry of Health. After nearly 3 decades, Kibaki would finally quit government in 1991 and form his own party, the Democratic Party, ahead of the 1992 general election. Even in the opposition, Kibaki would remain instrumental in shaping public discourse around the country's economic agenda. In November 1994, 2 years ahead of the privatization of national flag carrier Kenya Airways, Kibaki would raise questions around the uncertainty which seemed to surround the exercise and the company's debt. Kibaki would say this on the floor of the House, and I quote, "We are about to privatize Kenya Airways very soon. None of the ministers in government are willing to speak the truth. There is 6.5 billion shillings which the airline owes. There is no way of writing off 6.5 billion shillings which we will pay over the next 20 years. We should be told that it is we Kenyans being asked to assume this debt." End of quote. Still in 1994, Mwai Kibaki's contribution towards the Capital Markets Authority Bill would be peppered with unusual candor, a critical ingredient for a country which is seeking to strengthen its capital markets. Before the National Assembly, Mwai Kibaki would say, and I quote, "The Capital Markets Authority as a parastatal has a membership of people who have never participated in dealing with money, yet they are going to supervise the stock exchange. Those who are going to supervise their appointment don't know what an exchange rate is to begin with. This is the most atrocious thing we can have." End of quote. But it is Kibaki's contribution to the economy as president between 2003 and 2013 that will perhaps remain etched in the mind of many Kenyans for years to come. At the point of assuming office in 2003, the country's economy had ground to near stagnation, growing at a measly 0.5% in 2002. The formal economy was creating only 27,500 jobs to absorb the ever-increasing volume of job seekers, and foreign direct investment had fallen to just $27.6 million. Mwai Kibaki's first order of business as president of the then ailing economy would be to draw up the 5-year economic recovery strategy for wealth and employment creation. Published in June 2003, the strategy would be anchored on the following key objectives: creation of at least 500,000 jobs annually, reducing the poverty rate by 5% from the then level of 56.8%, realizing high economic growth with a target of 7% by 2006, and keeping inflation below 5%. The goal of 500,000 jobs per annum would, however, not be realized until 2010, when the total number of new employment opportunities created in both the formal and informal sectors stood at 503,500. This notwithstanding, perhaps Mwai Kibaki's strongest score was the increase in the number of jobs created by the formal economy, from a low of just 5.6% as he assumed office in 2003 to a high of 15.7% as he handed over the reins a decade later.